And you're in the military with summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the 28-point plan of the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. The first thing is that Kiev disagrees with 3 key points of the peace agreement, according to CNN. Kiev authorities are ready to agree to most of the points of the peace agreement except limiting the size of the Ukrainian armed forces, renunciation of NATO membership and territorial concessions. So basically Ukrainians will never accept any changes or any limitations in these, let's say, 3 questions. And the problem is that the special military operation almost 4 years ago started because of the same things. The Russians at the beginning of the special military operation wanted to limit the size of the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russians wanted not to allow Ukraine to join NATO, and Russians wanted to establish complete control over the entire Donetsk and Lugansk regions. So, and now we see that we are at the same point that we was at 4 years ago. Ukraine is saying that they agreed to limit the size of the Ukrainian armed forces to 800 troops. So, but telling the truth, this is a very big number. Russia will never accept this number of troops in the Ukrainian armed forces, because with this number of troops, Ukraine will be able not just to hold the lines, to hold the fronts, but Ukraine will be able to do whatever it wants. Ukraine will be able to start developing, let's say, long-range missiles, drones. Ukraine, with this number of forces, will be able even to start developing their own nuclear weapon. So this is the point, because if Russia attack Ukraine once again in the future, and if Russia faces once again the resistance of 800,000 troops from the Ukrainian side, obviously first it will take months before the Russians will be able to, let's say, reduce this group of forces. But during this period of time, Ukraine will be able to mobilize additional forces, and most likely, according to possible peaceful agreement, the Western countries and the United States of America will send troops to the territory of Ukraine with the purpose to stop Russians. So this is the problem. So that is why, according to my understanding, Russia will accept 200,000 or 300,000 soldiers, and this is the maximum level that Russia will allow. Otherwise, the Russians will continue the special military operation. At the same time, the European leaders during the previous 24 hours made lots of very interesting statements. For example, the President of France, Macron, stated that backup forces will be deployed away from the front lines in places like Kiev or Odessa. So we see that the European countries don't care about any agreements between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States of America. They have their own history, they have their own line, and they're going to follow their own plans. And their plans include the British, French, and Turkish soldiers on the territory of Ukraine, controlled through coalition rather than NATO. So, and this is the point. Russia will never accept this configuration and this situation. But the question is why the United States of America is in a hurry, because states understand the current situation, that the Europeans don't want any peaceful agreement, that Russia can continue the special military operation and they can achieve their goals and their tasks using military means. So why the United States of America is in a hurry? And states are in a hurry because of one thing, because of the siege of Zaporizhzhia. So this is the city I'm talking about. And the problem is that the Russians are getting closer and closer to this big city, the biggest city that Russia can capture since the beginning of the special military operation. And not just the biggest, this is going to be one of the biggest city. You know that every single settlement that the Russians captured since the beginning of the special military operation, we can say that these towns and cities are very small. But Zaporizhzhia can be captured by Russians, and this can become the biggest disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine. So you may say how the Russians are able to capture the city if this is a very big city, probably 3 times more than the city of Pokrovsk. And as we discussed in the previous videos, the main problem for Ukraine is that the city of Zaporizhzhia, at least its main part, is located on the Russian side of the river of Dnipro. So this blue area is the river of Dnipro, and the city of Zaporizhzhia is located on the Russian side. Which means that if the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, let's say, are able to get this red line, if they can capture everything until this red line. From this configuration, from these positions, Ukrainians and Ukrainian soldiers and the most important population of the city of Zaporizhzhia will lose any possibilities to get supply and support from the mainland. And from this position and from this configuration, the Ukrainians in the end would be forced to fall back on the Ukrainian side of the river of Dnipro, and basically the city of Zaporizhzhia will fall in the Russians' hands without any resistance from the Ukrainian side. So here we can see the same the situation, the repeat of the story as used to be with the city of Kherson. The Russians, due to complete absence of any supply and support and problems with logistics during the let's say Kherson counteroffensive operation of 2022, were forced to fall back from this area because they realized that if they stay in the city of Kherson, then most likely they would be completely destroyed by the armed forces of Ukraine. So basically the Russians decided to save their army. So the same situation will be with Ukrainians in the territory of Zaporizhzhia. So, but you might say that there is still a huge distance between edge positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and the city of Zaporizhzhia. The distance is not very big. The distance between this red line and the edge positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation is already less than 60 kilometers. Basically 55 kilometers without trenches, fortifications, without more or less reliable defensive line. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of updates that Ukrainians began collecting and concentrating significant number of forces along the river. We are also actively monitoring the Ukraine Armed Forces units deployment to the Gulay-Polye front by the Ukraine Armed Forces Command. Currently, the presence of the 154th Mechanized Brigade, the 92nd Assault Brigade, the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Assault Brigade, and the 3rd Battalion of the Presidential Brigade has been noted on the front. So Ukrainians are trying to reinforce and to make probably the most strong defense layer along the road R85 and the river of by the name of Haichul. So Ukrainians will try to hold these positions at any cost, because they understand if Russians are able to establish control over the city of Gulay-Polye, if Russians are able to cut physically the road R85, if the Russians are able to cross the river of Haichul and to take under control first villages on the Ukrainian side of the river, this is going to be the complete collapse of the entire Zaporizhzhia direction. And most likely the Russians will be able to cross this distance between the river of, let's say, of Gaichul, the R85 road, and this red line, probably within 2 or 3 months. And as soon as the Russians are able to get here, probably even here, Ukrainians would be forced to announce the evacuation of the city of Zaporizhzhia. And if Russians are able to move even further, Ukrainians would be forced to fall back completely from this territory. So this is the situation. And if Zaporizhzhia falls, most likely there is a very high chances that Ukraine as a state may fall as well. So this is the biggest problem that Ukraine may face in 2026. As for the morning of the 26th of November of 2025, the Russians began assault operation on the city of Gulay-Polye. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos of how Russians were bombing and attacking the city of Gulay-Polye with all types of calibers they have. Lots of explosions, lots of attacks. The Russians are attacking, we're using the broad front line attack. The Russians understand that they still have time. While the Ukrainians haven't managed to finish the redeployment, the Russians have time. So that is why they will try to use this situation with the purpose to increase the pressure and to break through Ukrainian defense. Once again, if Ukraine loses control over the R85 road, if Ukraine loses control over the river of Gaichul, most likely we can start counting days before the fall of the city of Zaporizhzhia. We are not talking about even the city of Orekhov, because the city of Orekhov will fall automatically. This is the problem, and this is the reason why the United States of America wants to force Zelensky to accept Russia's demands. But for some reason, Europeans and Ukraine itself don't want to accept any demands from the Russian side. And telling the truth, I don't understand this situation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Pokrovsk, in the city of Mirnograd. As you can see, the map has been adjusted significantly. This is the situation by the end of the 25th of November of 2025, and by the end of the 25th of November of 2025, we had no doubts that the city of Mirnograd was completely encircled by Russians and that the city of Pokrovsk was almost under complete control of the armored force of the Russian Federation. But by the morning of the 26th of November, we received additional details, and according to them, the Russians were forced to fall back, and the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions in the northwestern part of the city of Pokrovsk. This is the situation by the end of the 25th, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 26th of November. This information was confirmed by very reliable pro-Russian sources. But the most important thing that we haven't adjusted almost anything that was recently confirmed as Russian-controlled territory. We just adjusted the gray zone where we still haven't received any confirmation of additional progress on the ground from the Russian side. So the fields to the south of Grishna were colored, and the most northern part of the city of Pokrovsk and some positions along the Kostubinskого Street. So these territories were recaptured by the Ukrainians, and this is a piece of plan about the unblocking of the contingent of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of Mirnograd. Furthermore, the Ukrainians counterattacked in the area of Olympiyskaya Street, Ukrainians counterattacked in the territory of Rodinskaya and Zaporizhzhia Street, and Ukrainians managed to maintain and to create a small corridor between the city of Mirnograd and the mainland. So we were talking about this yesterday. If you remember, several pro-Ukrainian sources reported that probably they have up to 2 days to finish evacuation. We need to understand that despite the fact that Ukrainians managed to create this corridor, it's impossible to hold this corridor for a very long period of time. It's even more looks like a trap than like a corridor. The Russians probably allowed the Ukrainians to create this corridor. Now Ukrainians will try to use this line for evacuation, and obviously Ukraine will suffer huge losses. While retreating from this territory, Russians will attack them with FPV drones, and probably up to 80 or even 90% of Ukrainian soldiers most likely will not be able to break through the encirclement and to get the city of Grishna. As for the city of Mirnograd, the map has been adjusted as well. This is the situation by the end of the 25th of November, and this is already 26th of November. The Russians improved their positions in the most northern part of the city of Mirnograd. Basically, Russians finished the battle for the northern citadel. Furthermore, the Russians continue advancing along the railways in the direction of the central part of the city, trying to cut the city into many small pieces. And according to information we have, by the morning of the 26th of November, the Russians finished the battle for the most southern part of the settlement. And as you can see, we have adjustments on the eastern part of the city. This is the situation on the 25th, and this is already at 26th of November. We came to this conclusion that the Russians secured the eastern part of the city of Mirnograd based on this video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources. Here we can see how several Russian soldiers surrendered to the armored forces of Ukraine. So there are up to 5 Russian soldiers that surrendered to the armored forces of Ukraine, and this episode took place exactly at this point. So most likely Russians, to be more precisely, sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armored forces of the Russian Federation entered the central part of the city of Mirnograd, but were encircled and captured by Ukrainians. But this means that most likely the Russians have a very strong control over the eastern part of the city. So once again, despite the fact that Ukrainians indeed counterattacked in the northern and the northwestern parts of the city of Pokrovsk, the battle for the entire Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration is coming to its logical end and most likely will be finished in coming days, maybe weeks. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.